Over the first three off seasons since Steve Cohen took over the New York Mets, this franchise has added a ton of talent via free agency. On the show today, I will focus in on what I believe is the best contract that has been signed in that period, and that is Starling Marte's 4-year, $78 million deal last offseason.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter, @FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, I've been circling this topic on my show note sheet for a while. It's something I wanted to get into, and today felt like a good enough day to do it. I really want to look at Starling Marte and the value he has brought this franchise, because I really believe that if we look at all the contracts that have been signed, this has been the best contract to date. Now, there's others that could outperform it over the next couple of years, and we'll get to them in the next segment. But first, let's just discuss the first year that Starling Marte had with the New York Mets. It was an all-star season. He hit .292, .347 on base, .468 slugging. Now, what I love about that slash line, it's the high average. I know that even myself in particular, we've gotten away from valuing batting average, and it's more of a focus on base percentage. It's the Moneyball effect, right? A guy getting on base via a walk or a hit, it doesn't matter how they get on, just get on base. But to me, when we watch a lineup try to perform and get through the slumps, the struggles, the down periods, or even when things are going well, what moves the needle more than a walk? A hit. I will take a single over a walk any day, and the reason why I say that is because, for one, there's a little bit more momentum that comes with a base hit. But two, if there's runners on base, well, a single, a runner can go from first to third. On a walk, they go from first to second. And the same thing goes even more importantly, they're on second base coming around to score. So that is where a hit is more valuable than a walk. So as much as we love a Daniel Vogelback, all those walks, they don't amount to as much because he's clogging things on the base pass, and his walk might not necessarily lead to a run the same way as Starling Marte base hit will. So even though Marte gets on base at not the same type of a clip, there is some more value that lies in being able to flirt with a 300 batting average, and he did post a 310 average in his 2021 season. So the last couple of years, Starling Marte has found something as he's gotten into his 30s, as he's continued to develop as a baseball player, and he's gone through some periods where he was a little bit better with the Pirates, and then there was the steroid suspension, there was some downturn, but overall, you look at a career hitter who has a .290 slash line, .346 on base, .453 slugging. It's about identical to what he just put up with the Mets, slightly better last season. His WRC plus for his career is 119. Again, that measures hitters based on a league average of 100, weighted runs created plus. His WRC plus last year with the Mets was 136. Very strong, 36% better than the league average hitter. And I know that he's not going to provide the most pop in the world, but 16 bombs in 118 games is pretty good as well. That's about on pace for a 20 home run season. He had 18 stolen bases. If Starling Marte was healthy last year, he would have been a 2020 guy, and that is not something that we've seen a lot of from the Mets. To have him and Lindor bringing similar skill sets in their ability to hit for a high average, to steal some bases, to bring you some pop. It's good to have those guys ahead of Pete Alonso in the lineup, as Pete can then clean them up and drive them in. So I think while Starling Marte missed some time last year, we overall saw his impact. You look at the F4 at 3, his defensive metrics weren't great last year, and I think that sometimes defensive metrics, while I value them extremely highly, they can be a little bit wrong on a player. There could be a couple of plays that can highlight or could exaggerate the weaknesses of a player defensively and cause some outliers where you look at the stats and you say, how is Starling Marte a net negative on defense? We watched him every day. If his defensive value was even neutral, his F4 would have been at least 4 last season. And, if it was above average defense, he'd be closer to the 5.5 F4 player he was heading into free agency. But, the Mets were able to take a guy that was coming off a great season with again, near 6 WAR season. That was in 120 games that he put up that 5.5 F4. So when he hit that free agent mark, everyone probably could have projected, in a great year, this could be a 6-win player. To be able to take that guy, plug him into your team, plug him into right field at the dollar value the Mets did, it's one of the best signings they have made over the past decade. And it's funny because I made a link before the Mets even signed Starling Marte to Curtis Granderson. And Granderson signs that 4-year deal with the Mets. It was a 4-year, $60 million. Obviously some inflation there as you compare it to the 78 that Marte got. Guys that had similar careers, former speedsters that still had a little bit left in the tank there, that could play some defense in center and right field, that could come over, get plugged in, and try to help put a team over the top. For Granderson, 2014, the Mets started building something, but weren't quite all the way there. And then in 2015, he had his best season in a Mets uniform, and then went all the way to the World Series. And if go back and look at the stats that season, as much as we all love what Yoenis Cespedes did, as much as Daniel Murphy was incredible in the playoffs, Curtis Granderson, you can make an argument, he was the best position player on that Mets team. His second half stats actually rival Cespedes. It's insane. And he was great in the playoffs as well. So could we see Marte have a similar second year with the Mets where he puts it all together, stays healthy, the Mets as a team continue to build on what they did last year, and they were a 101-win team. If they could be better this year, what does that mean? It could mean a division title and potentially a deep run to the playoffs. We're going to get to that in the final segment. First, though, I want to compare Marte's contract to some of the other ones that have been signed recently to really illuminate that value. But before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are here, and we are thrilled about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sportsbook in America. That is FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, it's even better because they have so many great features you can learn about that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers can join today and get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed. All you have to do is place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spread to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, the premise behind my argument that Starling Marte is the best value free agent signing the Mets have made is simply that. It comes down to the per year value compared to some of the other guys they've signed. Because, granted, Max Scherzer is the best player that has been added via free agency. Justin Verlander this offseason, probably number 2 in line with that. But those guys are making so much money at such an advanced stage of their career that you can't tell me that Starling Marte for $78 million over 4 years is not as valuable as what you're paying for when it comes to a Justin Verlander contract that's $86.6 million for 2 years. He's getting over $8 million more for half of the time. You look at the Scherzer contract, very similar, $130 million. So that's almost, within 10, 15, $20 million of being double the amount of money that Marte is getting for one less year. You're talking about, what's that, $72 million? No. God, I am so bad at math, people. $52 million. It's horrible. And this is why I write. I write because I can use a calculator when I write and make sure that that quick math I do in my head isn't just blatantly wrong in my pieces that I write for justbaseball.com. Yeah, again, still, the difference there, $52 million of difference across a 3-year deal for Scherzer, 4-year deal for Marte. Then you look at the other signings the Mets have made. They just don't compare to what Marte can bring as a player. Mark Canha, Eduardo Escobar. Nice signings, okay with the dollar amount, 26.5 for Canha for 2 years, 20 for Escobar. Baseline starters that are slightly above average. They're not an all-star, as Starling Marte was that last season. You have the reliever signings, the Trevor Mays of the world, the Adam Ottavinos. Doesn't really compare, although Ottavino was on a fantastic deal last offseason. $4 million, $1 million of incentives that he ended up getting, but $5 million for the season he put up was remarkable value. It's just not the same thing as an everyday, right fielder. James McCann, do we even need to discuss that contract that was signed under the Steve Cohen era? Awful. Omar Narvaez gets signed this offseason. We'll see how that plays out, but unless this guy just goes nuclear, there's no chance he's going to provide the value that Marte does. Tommy Pham, same thing, 1-year deal. David Robertson this offseason, 1-year deal and a reliever. Ottavino comes back, 2-year deal. A ton of money deferred in that contract. Totally missed that until I looked at it today. $4 million deferred in each of the next 2 seasons. So while he got 14, was it 14.75? It was 14 and change. I know that. 8 of that is deferred. That's kind of crazy the way the Mets are able to structure it. And good for Ottavino. He's going to be getting paid almost until his 50s. So that's nice for him. It's like $500K a year. You look at Kodai Senga. That's the only contract the Mets have signed over the past 3 years that I could point to and say, okay, that one could be more valuable than Starling Marte because it's 5 years, $75 million. He's getting paid less than Marte, and he could have a bigger role. If he can be what he was in the MPB, or at least a facsimile of that for the Mets, and he's a dynamic 3-starter that's striking out 10 batters per 9 and racking up innings for you, I mean, that's going to really, really translate well and help the Mets exponentially to the point where you could probably say it's a more valuable contract than what Starling Marte is getting, with it being a 4-year deal at very similar money. But Marte is a perfect fit on this roster. He was addressing an area of absolute weakness in the outfield, and luckily they were able to re-sign Brandon Nimmo to mitigate that weakness. But had Nimmo walked, I mean, Marte would be your only long-standing outfield option. They have him for 3 more years beyond, 3 more years beyond last season. There's 3 years left. 2023 will be one of those 3 years, 2 years beyond this season. And I think he's going to continue to age well out in right field. I think he'll be able to stick in that position. And if he continues to hit the way he has the last couple of seasons, this is a player that will be worth every single penny of that contract and probably worth even more. What will he be, though, for the remainder of that deal? We'll get to that next. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Now, Starling Marte has 3 years left in his deal with the New York Mets. He turned 34 in October, so they paid for his age 34, 35, and 36 season. Well, age 33, 34, 35, and 36 seasons. And I'm great with that. I'm totally okay with that. I'm not worried about his age at all. His sprint speed last year was in the 68th percentile. His arm strength in the 89th percentile. So still an above average athlete. He gets good jump on the ball, 61st percentile in outfielder jump. His stats above average last year weren't great, but I do believe that's going to tick up this season. And you look at the expected batting average, to be in the 89th percentile, it shows that when it comes to hitting for average with his combination of power and speed, he is going to be one of the best hitters at, simply that, hitting, at batting average. And while I already mentioned the walks count the same towards your on-base percentage, and everyone values OBP more than batting average, and that is great. When you have a Brandon Nimmo getting on base at an elite rate, when you have Jeff McNeil as a guy that's going to hit for an extremely high average, draws walks, get on base at a high clip, when you have a Daniel Vogelbach in the lineup that gets on base at a good clip, Mark Canha, even Pete Alonso, you want some guys that hit for a high average, that get their on base percentage from swinging the stick, and that's what Marte does so well. I think he's going to continue to do that. He doesn't strike out at an alarming rate either. Last season was high for him at 19.2%. It was at 18.8% the previous season, and then he had a couple of years before that where he was in the 16s. So maybe he can cut down the strikeouts a little bit more. But if he keeps them under 20%, you love it. Even though he only walked at a 5.1% clip, it does not really matter when you're hitting 292. And I think that Marte has it in him to do that and more this season. The biggest question is going to be health moving forward. He's a guy that, for his career has 153 games played, but he only hit over 150 games played that one time. Had 145 games played in 2018. Obviously, 2017, that was when he missed the time due to the suspension. But he's basically been consistent in the fact that he's going to miss some time. He'll have a IL stint each year, but he's going to go out and going to give you 120 to 140 games. And for the Mets, that is perfectly acceptable as long as he continues to hit that mark. Last year, 118 games played. You'd like to see more this year if he can stay on the field, give you 135. You feel amazing about your team. And then to also think about what he was able to pull off in the postseason, to go from not playing in September with that finger injury after getting hit by a pitch, and then to all of a sudden get forced into action and actually look competent in that playoff series. I mean, the numbers overall don't look great. He hit 167 in that series, but we saw the at-bats that he gave. He had a good first game, and he went out, he hit the ball hard, and didn't find a lot of success. His BABIP was 182, but he struck out the same amount of times as he walked. Nothing crazy there. It was just a rough series for the Mets overall, but Starling Marte's performance coming off that injury was so impressive. He's an absolute gamer. You just want to make sure you keep him on his feet, especially towards the end of the season, because I really do believe had Starling Marte not gotten hurt, the Mets would have won the division, and who knows how much history could have changed if they would have had a bye in that first round, and instead of facing the Padres, they could have gone up against the Phillies, a team that they owned throughout the season, winning 14 of 19. There's still a chance the Mets get embarrassed by Philly, but a lot better odds the Mets would have made it deep, a World Series run potentially, had they gotten that bye in the first round. That's why it was so important to win the division. That's why it's so frustrating that Marte could not contribute in those games down the stretch. So, again, overall point here, when you're looking at a player that's making $19.5 million that can be an all-star for you multiple times over this 4-year deal, which I still think is a distinct possibility, particularly this season. I'm expecting a big year out of Marte where he can be an all-star again, hit maybe 20 home runs this year, maybe swipe some more bags, maybe can push for 30 again or at least over 25. He's a little more efficient with the bases that he stole, because he did get caught quite a few times last season. If he can hit over 290 again, man, that's going to be great value, particularly when you add in the arm out in right field, the defense. I think he can win a Gold Glove in right field too. I really do. I think he's going to prove to be a much better right fielder this season, having that full year under his belt to adjust. I think we're going to see a lot of great things from Marte moving forward, and it's great that the Mets have him for 3 more seasons. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, @FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show, @Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects, hosted by Lindsey Crosby. Locked On MLB Prospects is where you want to go to learn about the stars of tomorrow. You can follow Locked On MLB Prospects on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.